He rescued the noble alien warrior without knowing who she was. Her gift changed everything. The electric gales swept across the desolate flats of Varellus 4. Inside his weather-beaten habitat, Marcus watched a jagged pulse flicker across his scanner, a sharp emerald spike, potent enough to fry the circuits of his entire outpost. He'd come to this remote moon for the promise of anonymity and salvage, but isolation meant braving the planet's relentless tempests. As another shockwave rattled the structure, Marcus sipped weak synth coffee, eyes fixed on the monitor. The scanner flared, green light painting the cramped room with an unearthly glow. "What the hell?" he muttered. The readings were erratic, spiking and then vanishing, only to surge back with a vengeance. He tapped the side of the display, heart pounding. There, a new signature. Not the dead echo of metal or power cells, but something warmer, organic, alive. He should have ignored it. Stay inside, wait out the storm, let the signal fade. That's what he told himself. But old instincts clawed their way up. Training, duty. The man he used to be before Varellus, before exile. He slammed the mug down, grabbed his patched weather suit, and keyed the outpost's emergency lock. "Idiot," he cursed, voice nearly lost in the roar outside. He slung his pack over one shoulder, checked the medkit, and ran for the hover ATV. Lightning danced across the horizon, tracing veins of neon through the violet sky. The ATV's engine whined as he gunned it into the squall, grit pelting his visor, wind howling like a living thing. Minutes blurred into raw survival, navigating by flashes of energy, steering around blackened outcrops and treacherous sinkholes. At last, through curtains of static, he saw it. A long, smoldering scar in the earth, the remains of a ship unlike any he'd salvaged before. He skidded to a stop, boots sinking into ash. The craft lay half-buried, hull fractured, the surface shimmering as arcs of green electricity leapt between exposed struts. Marcus's hands shook as he forced the hatch, the metal screeching beneath his grip. Inside, the air was thick with ozone and the copper tang of alien fuel. He moved quickly, checking the cockpit. The pilot, a humanoid, tall, armored in silver and amethyst, was already gone, neck at an unnatural angle, eyes glassy. Marcus swallowed, pushing past. There was no time for the dead. The rear compartment was a chaos of broken struts and shattered cargo. He heard a faint, desperate gasp, a sound that didn't belong to the storm. He moved debris aside, revealing a figure half-buried under a collapsed support beam. She was unlike anything he'd seen, skin a luminous green, every muscle taut with pain even in unconsciousness. Vivid purple hair spilled over her shoulder in a thick ponytail, framing pointed ears that flicked at each noise. Her armor was dented, marked with intricate sigils and bands of color. He hesitated only a moment, then knelt beside her, pressing 2 fingers to her neck. The pulse was weak, fluttering, still alive. "Hang on," he breathed, adrenaline surging as he braced the beam and lifted. She was heavier than she looked, all lean strength beneath alien armor. As he moved her free, her hand brushed his forearm, shockingly warm. He caught a flash of insignia on her chest plate, complex, geometric, authoritative. Whoever she was, she mattered. He hauled her across his shoulders, stumbling out into the gale. Each step was a battle, wind clawing at them, lightning scarring the sky overhead. Her head lolled against his chest, breath shallow but steady. By the time he reached the outpost, his arms trembled from exhaustion. He laid her down beside the humming generator, hands numb as he peeled away shattered armor and cleaned blood from wounds that oozed iridescent violet. Medgel hissed as he sprayed it over bruises and gashes, sealing flesh with a silver sheen. He found her suit shredded, almost fused to skin in places. With a deep breath, he cut away the worst of it, wrapping her in one of his own faded shirts. Her form was all alien angles and impossible grace, shoulders broad, waist narrow, limbs strong and lithe. He settled her onto his cot, draping a thermal blanket over her. His mind spun with questions. Who was she? What was she running from? Why here? Why now? But exhaustion drove him to a restless half-sleep, always listening for her breath. The storm outside battered the habitat for 2 days, roaring like some ancient beast. Marcus moved between his tools and her bedside, watching the rise and fall of her chest, counting the seconds between each uneven breath. He tended her wounds, replacing dressings, coaxing fluids into her with trembling hands. He drank mug after mug of bitter coffee, eyes bloodshot, sleep a distant memory. Sometimes she stirred, face contorted with dreams. Her lips moved in a language he didn't know, voice lilting, melodic even in pain. Other times she was still, the only sign of life a faint shimmer beneath her skin, as if some internal fire kept her alive. On the 3rd day, the air shifted. Marcus felt it before he saw it, the silence in the storm's heart, the way the world held its breath. He looked up as her eyes fluttered open, brilliant, luminous, blue shot through with gold. She stared at him, gaze unblinking, piercing through layers of exhaustion and fear. He raised his hands, palms out. "It's all right. You're safe." She didn't understand the words, but something in his voice reached her. She frowned, glancing down at her injuries, then back at him. He pointed to himself. "Marcus." She tilted her head, considering. Her lips moved, forming a name. Sevra. Her accent twisted the syllables, music woven into each sound. He smiled, relief making his shoulders sag. "Sevra," he repeated gently. She nodded once, regal even on his battered cot. Their first days together were a slow, silent negotiation. Sevra learned quickly, watching his gestures, mimicking his motions. Water, food, bandages, each became a ritual of trust. She carried herself with a warrior's pride, eyes sharp with intelligence, her every movement precise. Sometimes he caught her watching him as he worked, curiosity tempered by caution. The outpost felt smaller, air thick with unspoken questions. At night, Marcus lay on the floor beside the generator, unable to sleep. He listened to Sevra's breathing, the faint rustle as she shifted beneath the blankets. Her scent, fresh rain and wild herbs, clung to the air, making him ache for things he could barely name. On the 5th night, the fever came. Sevra shook with chills, sweat beading on her brow, lips murmuring in her strange tongue. Marcus wrapped cooling packs around her, forced sips of water past her lips, desperation mounting with each hour. Her hands gripped his wrist, fingers strong even in weakness. Her eyes opened, wild with terror. She fixed him with a look that burned through language and memory. "Vetra. Kaelin," she choked out, voice pleading and commanding at once. He squeezed her hand, voice rough. "I won't let you go. I'm here." She clung to him, shivering. He stroked her hair, whispered nonsense, comfort, promise, hope. At dawn, her fever broke, sweat cooling against her skin. She sagged into him, breath coming in ragged gasps. He should have moved away, given her space. But she pulled him close, her body arching to meet his. The air between them charged with something fierce and immediate, a need that erased fear and doubt, forged in storm and silence. Their lips met, urgent, desperate, a collision of worlds on the edge of oblivion. They came together without words, two souls tangled in the void, alive against impossible odds. The storm faded, leaving only the hush of wind and the memory of what had passed. Marcus awoke to Sevra's gaze, solemn, unflinching. They avoided each other's eyes as they dressed, the air heavy with consequence. He was about to speak, ask her what came next, when the scanner shrieked. A new signal eclipsed everything, massive and cold, swallowing the outpost in its shadow. Sevra stood, all the softness gone, shoulders squared as she stared at the trembling walls. Outside, a colossal alien dreadnought blotted out the sky, its hull pulsing with indigo fire. Marcus stood beside her, heart pounding. In that moment, he realized nothing would ever be the same. A shuttle landed, armored figures emerging in precise formation, their reflective breastplates catching the dying light as the engines spat static and dust across the battered outpost. Marcus stood frozen, heart drumming in his chest, as the ramp hissed open and the Zalari delegation descended. Disciplined, tall, almost statuesque, each one moving with inhuman grace. At their center strode a woman whose presence commanded the eye, a leader, her dark hair bound in braids, her silver armor etched with elaborate insignia. She moved toward the survivor from the wreck, boots ringing against the metal, visor retracting to reveal a face both severe and beautiful. Marcus felt himself shrink in her gaze, a scavenger under the scrutiny of royalty. But the alien girl, no, Lyra, stepped forward, shoulders squared, the battered shirt Marcus had wrapped her in now covered by a regal sash and the battered remains of her armor. She ignored Marcus's warning glance, meeting the officer's eyes with authority. The officer saluted crisply. "Lady Lyra, the matriarch scoured the sector for you. The sovereign sensors tracked your beacon the moment the storm broke." Her Zalari was flawless, the consonants sharp and resonant. Marcus's ears rang. The matriarch. He tried to interpret the words, but the intent was unmistakable. Lyra was no ordinary survivor. She was royalty. Lyra's gaze flicked to Marcus. For a moment, her luminous eyes softened, but then she straightened, adopting a mask of impassivity. She turned to face him, voice cool and suddenly, impossibly, fluent in his own language. "The Zalari Dominion thanks you for your assistance, human." Marcus felt the gulf open wide, a chasm between the outcast Terran and the daughter of an empire. Her words were ceremonial, rehearsed, as if nothing had passed between them in the storm. He tried to find his voice. "Lyra, The officer cut him off. "By decree of the matriarch, you are owed a reward." Her stare was clinical, measuring, as though calculating how much trouble a Terran might cause. Lyra's jaw tightened. "For saving the matriarch's daughter, you are granted a reward. You will serve as my champion in the rite of contest." Her tone was flat, regal, utterly impersonal. Marcus's mind reeled. Champion? He looked from Lyra to the officer, searching for any sign this was a mistake, a joke, anything but what it sounded like. The officer's lips curled in a sneer. "You will fight for her honor. You now belong to the Dominion." Two soldiers seized his arms, gauntlets cold and unyielding. Lyra did not meet his gaze as they dragged him up the ramp, the shuttle's doors sealing behind them with a hiss that felt like the end of something vital. The Sovereign was a maze of chrome and shadow, its corridors lined with silent sentries and the faint thrum of alien engines. Marcus's boots rang on the deck plates as he was herded through security checkpoints, stripped of his battered clothes, scanned by cold machines that cataloged every scar and old wound. His name was reduced to an ID string, his past erased in favor of a designation: human, salvager, asset. They threw him into a sterile cell, walls seamless, ceiling glowing with diffuse light, a single cot bolted to the floor. He pressed his fists to his eyes, tried to slow his breathing, but the panic kept growing. He was back in a cage, another pawn for a system that had already destroyed so much. Hours, maybe days, bled together. He was given rations, allowed brief walks under the watch of guards whose eyes never left his hands. When they finally came for him, he was escorted to a cavernous training deck, the air sharp with the scent of sweat and ozone. There, he met Kale. A scarred, broad-shouldered Zalari, his hair iron gray, his eyes old and pitiless. "I am tasked with molding a Terran scavenger into something that won't disgrace the High Lady's name," Kale said, his voice gravel and contempt. "A fool's errand, but I obey." Kale tossed Marcus a practice staff. "Show me what you can do." Marcus fell into a defensive stance, knees bent, staff gripped tight. He remembered bar fights, scraps in ruined cities, the ugly necessity of survival. He fainted, swung, and Kyle's staff snapped his aside, catching him hard in the ribs. Pain flared. "Again," Kale commanded. They drilled for hours. Kale's movements were precise, ritualized, every attack measured, every defense a formality. Marcus was a brawler, all instinct and improvisation, but the Zalari style demanded discipline, honor, control. "You fight like a desperate animal," Kale spat, knocking Marcus flat with a brutal sweep. "No discipline, no honor." Marcus spat blood, climbed to his feet. "Survival isn't always pretty," Kale snorted. "If you fight like this in the arena, you will die. Worse, you will humiliate Lady Lyra. Perhaps you would prefer the honor of a quick execution?" Marcus glared at him, jaw set. "No. I'll learn." Above the deck, behind a crystalline partition, Lyra watched. Her uniform was immaculate, her hair braided in ceremonial coils. She did not smile. She did not acknowledge him. The woman who had clung to him in the storm was gone, replaced by the matriarch's daughter, cool and unreadable. Each day blurred into the next. Drills, bruises, lessons in Zalari etiquette. Marcus learned to parry with grace, to salute with the correct angle, to kneel when addressed by his lady. Kale never relented. Marcus lost count of how many times he was knocked to the floor. Between lessons, he glimpsed Lyra in the halls, always surrounded by retainers. Her eyes sometimes lingered on him, but she never spoke. Marcus felt himself shrinking, reduced to a role he did not understand. The day of the tournament arrived. The arena was a vast amphitheater, a storm of voices echoing off silver walls. Marcus's armor pinched at the shoulders, the Zalari symbols foreign against his skin. He stood at the foot of Lyra's platform, Kale at his side, the crowd a sea of anticipation. Across the sand, the rival champion entered, a giant in crimson and obsidian, a mountain of muscle and pride. Drax. His eyes swept the arena, his confidence absolute. Drax mounted the platform, taking Lyra's hand in his massive grip. "Once this formality is over, our union will proceed. I trust your pet won't shame you," he rumbled, voice carrying over the crowd. Lyra's face was carved from stone. "My champion will fulfill his duty, Lord Drax." The rules were simple. Win or lose everything. Marcus's first match was a blur. A brute twice his size, all fury and strength. Marcus ducked and weaved, letting the giant exhaust himself. He used every trick he knew. Feints, trips, desperate lunges. When the brute stumbled, Marcus swept his legs, sending him crashing to the sand. The crowd booed. Kale shook his head, disgusted. Marcus walked off the field, sweat streaming down his face, as Lyra confronted him in the corridor. "That was disgraceful," she said, voice low and sharp. He threw up his hands. "But I won." Lyra's eyes flashed. "Winning isn't the point. You represent my honor, not just yourself. Every move you make reflects on me, on my house." The words stung. He had risked his life for her, saved her from death, and now he was told he was not enough. The injustice burned. He took a shaky breath. "You don't understand what you've done," she snapped, her accent thickening. I was not waiting for rescue. I was fleeing a forced bond with Drax. You brought me back to my cage. Marcus reeled, the truth cutting deeper than any wound. Their night together, the desperate intimacy, recast as tragedy. He had not saved her. He had delivered her to her prison. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, voice cracking. She glared at him, eyes bright with unshed tears. And what would you have done? Fought a dreadnought with your bare hands? Your ignorance kept you alive. Silence stretched between them, heavy with pain and things left unsaid. This contest is my only hope, Lyra whispered. If Drax loses, my mother's leverage for the Union vanishes. But no one has ever defeated House Drax's champion. The stakes shifted in his mind. This was not about honor, but about freedom. Hers, and maybe his own. He stepped closer, searching her face, the memory of their night together burning between them. Then I guess I have to be the first, he said softly. For a heartbeat, something unguarded flickered in her eyes. Fear, hope, gratitude, all tangled together, before the mask slid back into place. But he had seen it. Their alliance was silent now, but unbreakable. The games were no longer a spectacle. They were a rebellion. Their training changed. The rigid drills and formal sparring gave way to something clandestine, almost electric. Late at night, when the Sovereign's corridors fell quiet and the arena lights dimmed to blue shadows, Marcus and Lyra became co-conspirators. The air between them thrummed with danger, secrecy, and something else. Something that had begun in the storm and now sparked beneath every glance and touch. Lyra shed her public mask, kneeling beside him on the training mats with a half-smile. You must learn to think like Zalari if you wish to beat them, she said, her voice low. She mapped out battlefield tactics with swift lines on the sand, explaining Zalari weaknesses, the flaws hidden behind their ceremonial moves, the pride that made them predictable. Marcus absorbed her lessons, but he gave back as much as he took. Watch, he said, tossing a battered staff between his hands. Zalari fight for form. Humans fight for survival. He demonstrated a feint, rolling under her guard, using her own momentum against her. It's not cheating if you're alive at the end. She laughed, the sound startling in the silent gym. Your ways are reckless. He grinned, breathless. But they work. Night after night, their distance dissolved. They argued, teased, and challenged each other with growing intensity. One session ended with Marcus pinning her to the mat, both of them panting, sweat glistening on skin and scales. Lyra's fingers traced the scar along his jaw, her eyes dark with questions and something like longing. You are not what I expected, she whispered. He brushed a strand of purple hair from her brow. Neither are you. Their faces hovered close, breath mingling. This time, when they kissed, it was deliberate. No accident of fever or fear. Lyra's lips parted beneath his, soft and eager, and his arm wrapped around her, pulling her flush against him. They clung to each other, a rebellion in the heart of the Dominion, a secret made flesh. Their passion was fierce and gentle by turns, bodies moving together as if trying to carve a private sanctuary from the cold geometry of Zalari steel. Lyra's touch was both tender and hungry. Marcus's hands roamed, memorizing every alien curve and line. They found solace in each other, two outcasts forging something new amid old traditions and hostile walls. Afterward, Lyra rested against him, tracing circles on his chest. You make me forget my duty, she murmured, her accent softer in the hush. He kissed her temple. Maybe you shouldn't. She propped herself on one elbow, eyes shining. Or maybe I should remember there is more to fight for than duty. In the days that followed, Marcus became a ghost in the arena. Against a scythe-armed beast, he set subtle tripwires, letting the creature's weight pull it into its own blade. Against a psychic, he closed his eyes, relying on his own mental scars, memories so jagged they scrambled the telepath's focus. The Zilari crowds murmured and whispered, the word trickster following him through the halls. Some cheered. Others spat at his feet. On the training deck, Kyle watched with grudging respect. "You survive," he grunted, "but you will never be one of them." "I don't want to be," Marcus shot back. Lyra endured scorn from her peers, and Drax's public taunts grew sharper. "Your pet is a disgrace," Drax sneered before the next bout, his voice carrying across the marble expanse. Lyra's reply was icy, her posture perfect. "He wins." That answer rippled through the audience, binding her fate to Marcus in the eyes of the Dominion. Rumors grew. Every look, every word between them was dissected in the court's shadowed corners. Their alliance was no longer a secret. It was a threat. One night, after the crowd's jeers faded and the corridors emptied, Lyra came to Marcus's quarters, silent and sure. The door closed behind her, and she pressed herself against him, her hands trembling only slightly as she pulled him down to the narrow cot. Their passion was urgent, a silent promise forged in the darkness. They moved together as if nothing else existed, as if every touch could drive away the coming storm. Afterward, Lyra curled against his side, her breath warm on his neck. "You taught me true strength," she whispered, "to adapt, to endure, to never yield." He smiled into her hair. "We call it stubbornness." She looked up, eyes bright with mischief and hope. "I call it hope." But hope was a fragile thing in the Dominion. The semi-final match loomed, a final test before the inevitable clash with Drax. The arena was a cauldron of noise, every seat filled, anticipation mounting. Marcus stood in the center, armored and aching. Across from him, a hulking Groth pounded its fists, muscles bulging beneath mottled skin. Its mouth split open in a roar, rows of jagged teeth flashing. Kale's voice echoed in Marcus's mind. "Wound his pride, make him angry." The gong sounded. The Groth charged, swinging a hammer the size of Marcus's torso. Marcus dodged, rolling beneath the blow, coming up behind the monster. He taunted it in broken Zilari. "Too slow! You fight like a hatchling!" And the beast howled, swinging wildly. Each time, Marcus retreated, drawing the Groth across the sand until sweat streamed down its back and its breaths came in ragged bursts. Finally, Marcus spotted his chance, a coolant vent half buried at the arena's edge. He dashed toward it, the Groth lumbering in pursuit. At the last second, Marcus dove aside, snatching a fallen spear and jamming it into the vent grill. Supercooled mist erupted, engulfing the Groth's feet. The monster skidded, legs locking as the chill bit deep. It roared in fury, but its mass betrayed it. With a final staggering lurch, it toppled, crashing to the ground as frost crawled up its flanks. Silence descended for a heartbeat. Then the crowd exploded, some booing, some cheering, many simply stunned. Marcus's ribs ached, every breath a struggle. He swayed, vision tunneling, blood pounding in his ears. Medics moved toward him, but Lyra was already descending from her platform, protocol forgotten. She crossed the arena in long, determined strides, her cloak trailing behind. Drax's eyes narrowed in disbelief as she knelt beside Marcus, her hand cradling his face. "You stubborn fool," she whispered, voice thick with emotion. "You promised not to get killed." He grinned weakly. "Not dead yet." Ignoring the scandalized stares of the assembled nobility, Lyra helped him to his feet, her arm firmly around his waist. The gesture was unmistakable, a noble bowing to a commoner, choosing not only her champion, but her equal. The shock rippled through the arena, echoing through the Dominion's heart. Lyra met Marcus's gaze, her chin lifted in open defiance. In that moment, with thousands watching, she chose her side, and it was his. In Lyra's formal suite, Drax confronted them, radiating menace. The doors slid shut behind him with a hiss, sealing them away from the rest of the sovereign. His crimson armor made him seem broader, shadows clinging to every sharp edge. His eyes, burning with entitlement and fury, swept the room before landing on the guards. "Leave us," he ordered. His voice was a blade. The guards hesitated, glancing at Lyra, but she gave the faintest nod. They filed out, leaving Drax, Lyra, and Marcus in the hush of the grand chamber. Drax stalked forward, a predator in ceremonial finery. He sneered, the expression twisting his already harsh features. "Your little spectacle was touching," he said, every syllable dripping with disdain. "You insult our bond and my house. The whole Dominion saw you choose a Terran over your fate." Lyra stepped between them, head high, shoulders thrown back, the golden light catching the fine scales at her temples. "There is no insult in honoring a warrior who fights for me," she replied, voice steady. "Or in binding myself to one who has earned it." Drax's nostrils flared. He turned to Marcus, gaze settling with lethal intent. "Tomorrow, you will yield in the first round," he said, every word a sentence, "or I will have your world stripped and enslaved. Resist, and your species will be marked for extinction. There are no limits to what I can take from you." The room seemed to constrict, the threat hanging in the air like poisonous gas. Marcus's mouth went dry. He looked at Lyra, saw the tremor in her clenched fist and the rage burning in her eyes. Lyra shook with anger. "You'd destroy a world for pride?" she spat. Drax didn't even blink. "Pride is all that remains," he replied. "You took my honor. I will take everything else." Marcus's pulse hammered in his ears. For so long he had run from war, from responsibility. But now, in Lyra's presence, with her fate and that of his world poised on the edge of a blade, he felt the old fire kindling inside him. He straightened, stepping into Drax's shadow. "I'll see you in the arena," Marcus said, voice low but clear. Lyra moved forward, placing herself at Marcus's side, hand pressed over her heart, a gesture of ancient significance. She met Drax's glare with open defiance. "He is not just my champion, Drax. He is my chosen. By ancient right, I bind my fate to his. If he falls, so does my claim to my mother's fleet and everything I stand for." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Marcus's breath caught. It was the ultimate gamble. Everything Lyra possessed, wagered on him. Drax bared his teeth in a twisted smile. "Then I'll enjoy taking everything from you both." He turned on his heel, boots ringing on the polished floor, and strode out, the doors hissing shut behind him. Silence lingered, thick with fear and hope. Lyra turned to Marcus, her facade finally crumbling. Her luminous eyes shone with emotion, voice trembling. "You just wagered the Dominion on a broken Terran," he said, trying for levity, but the words came out ragged. She stepped closer, her hand gentle on his cheek. "No," she whispered, "I wagered it on you." He covered her hand with his, feeling the tremble in her fingers. "Then let's win." The day of the final contest arrived. The arena was a roaring storm of voices, every seat filled, every eye locked on the sand below. Banners flickered, lights danced along the walls, and the air was thick with anticipation. Drax loomed on the opposite side of the arena, clad in ceremonial crimson armor, his presence a living threat. He hefted an energy halberd, the blade crackling with contained fury. His confidence was absolute, every movement calculated to display his dominance. Marcus entered with far less spectacle, wearing battered gray armor and clutching a shock baton and battered shield. He looked up at the matriarch's dais, found Lyra's gaze among the nobles, her hands clasped, knuckles white. He gave the barest nod. She returned it, hope and terror shining in her eyes. The bell rang sharp and final. Drax charged, swinging his halberd in a brutal arc. Marcus sidestepped, letting the weapon slice through empty air. He never met strength with strength. Instead, he flowed around Drax's attacks, using every inch of the arena to his advantage. He ducked, rolled, let Drax's fury spend itself in wasted movement. The crowd roared, but Marcus barely heard them. Every muscle screamed, his ribs still bruised from the last match. Drax's blows hammered his shield, each one a test of endurance. Marcus struck where he could, quick, stinging jabs with the baton that made Drax snarl in frustration. "You fight like a rat, Terran," Drax spat, circling. Marcus wiped blood from his mouth. "And you're not as clever as you think." Drax feinted, swinging low, trying to sweep Marcus's legs. Marcus jumped, bringing his baton down on Drax's gauntlet. Sparks flew. Drax grunted, the first crack in his composure showing. Time blurred. Sweat stung Marcus's eyes. He gave ground, always moving, never letting Drax pin him. He remembered Lyra's lessons: watch for patterns, wait for arrogance. Lyra watched, hands clenched at her chest, lips moving in silent prayer. The crowd had fallen silent, spellbound by the duel's intensity. It was not a contest of strength, but of survival and will. At last, Drax overreached, swinging with all his weight. Marcus dropped his battered shield and let the halberd's blade bury itself in the sand where he'd just stood. In that instant, Marcus lunged, grabbing Drax's knee and twisting hard. The giant stumbled, knees buckling. Marcus pressed a hidden blade, smuggled in a bracer, razor-sharp, against Drax's throat. The arena froze, every breath held. He could have ended it then, could have taken the life of the man who threatened his world and Lyra's freedom. Instead, Marcus stood, deactivated the blade, and stepped back. "It's over," he said, voice ringing through the hush. He turned away, showing his back to the defeated lord, the ultimate mercy and the ultimate humiliation. For a moment, the crowd was utterly silent. Then the matriarch rose from her throne, her cloak sweeping behind her like a wave. She began to clap, slow and deliberate, each strike echoing off the walls. The arena erupted in awe, cheers and cries of disbelief mixing in a thunderous ovation. Lyra ran down the steps, skirts trailing, tears glittering on her cheeks. She reached Marcus, flinging her arms around him, her laughter and sobs tangled together. The matriarch's voice boomed over the din. "The contest is finished. The debt is paid. The union is void. Lady Lyra's champion has shown a new kind of strength." Marcus held Lyra, her arms tight around his neck as the cheers faded. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of war and exile lifting, replaced by hope, by belonging. He looked at the woman in his arms and knew she was the real reward. For the first time since the war, he was home. 2 years later, on Unity, a city born from Terran and Zalari cooperation, Marcus stood on the balcony of their home, watching shuttles crisscross the sky. The city was improbable. Crystal towers spiraling into blue air, their facets catching the sunlight, entwined with human-built markets, old brick walkways, and hanging gardens. He could hear distant laughter, market vendors calling in a blend of languages, and the hum of commerce and hope. Unity was a testament to an unexpected future, one neither war nor tradition had foreseen. A familiar presence pressed against his back. Lyra slipped her arms around his waist, her cheek resting on his shoulder. She wore simple, flowing clothes now, her hair braided and loose, her features softened by peace and the gentle curve of pregnancy. Marcus covered her hands with his own, smiling as he leaned back into her embrace. He turned, searching her luminous eyes for a moment of quiet. They found it easily now. "We fought for this," he said softly, resting his palm on her belly, feeling the life stirring beneath. Lyra smiled, her voice gentle. "You risked everything on a broken Terran. He pressed his forehead to hers, eyes closed. It was the only bet I ever made that felt certain. She kissed him, and the years of war and doubt faded. Their kiss was no longer desperate but deep and sure, a language they had made their own, fluent in hope. A chime sounded from inside. The delegation had arrived. Lyra pulled back with a sigh, her hands lingering on his chest. Duty called, but for a heartbeat more, Marcus held her close. "Let them wait," he whispered, capturing her lips again, savoring the warmth and certainty of her. When they finally entered the reception hall, sunlight poured through crystalline windows, painting the walls in shifting patterns. Marcus greeted Commander Sato, once his superior and now a guest of honor, his uniform crisp and his eyes creased with pride. "Unity looks good on you, Marcus," Sato said, shaking his hand with both of his own. "We never thought this city would stand, let alone thrive." Marcus grinned. "Neither did I. The Terran Alliance is better at fixing things than anyone gives us credit for." Sato's gaze swept the room, lingering on Lyra, who was resplendent in her ceremonial sash. "You're a legend, you know. To both Zalari and Terrans, people still tell stories about the contest." Marcus shrugged, embarrassed. "I just did what I had to do." Sato leaned in, voice dropping. "You did what no one else dared. Made peace, not conquest. That's why we're here." Across the room, Lyra welcomed the Zalari delegation with regal composure. Kale, the old instructor, now retired and slower but no less imposing, offered her a deep bow. He crossed the floor toward Marcus, his gaze appraising but softened with age. "Kale," Marcus said with genuine affection, clasping the instructor's forearm. Kale nodded, his smile brief but real. "The colony is more harmonious than I expected." Marcus laughed, gesturing to the crowded hall. "That's the Zalari side. The Terran side is responsible for the questionable music." A human string band launched into a wild, off-kilter tune, drawing laughter from the guests. Kyle's eyes flicked to Lyra's belly, his expression thoughtful. "You are building more than a city." Lyra joined them, placing a gentle hand over her stomach. "We are building a future," she replied, her voice resonant, carrying the weight of hope. She looked at Kale, then Marcus, and the three of them shared a silent understanding. The evening reception was a tapestry of new tradition. Terran laughter mingled with Zalari formality, toasts given in both languages. Plates passed from hand to hand, flavors blending, spicy Zalari roots with Terran roast, alien fruit folded into human pastry. Lyra moved through the crowd, her every word a promise that the world could be different. Kale stood with Marcus, raising a crystal glass. "You know, the rules have changed since you arrived. There is a new course in the academy, adaptive combat. Unofficially, they call it Marcus's method." Marcus laughed, shaking his head. "Glad I could help. I hope they teach it with fewer bruises." Kale's expression grew serious. "You taught us the difference between pride and strength. Once, mercy was weakness. But sparing Drax was a deeper defeat than any death. He lives in exile, a monument to your strength and your choice." Marcus glanced across the room, where Lyra stood in conversation with dignitaries, every gesture assured and graceful. "I didn't do it for the Dominion," he said quietly. "I did it for her." Kyle set his glass down. "And that is why it mattered." Children ran between the guests, their laughter a melody Marcus had never thought to hear in such a place. He watched a small Zalari boy try a Terran dance, his friends joining in with wild abandon, and felt an ache of gratitude. A young Terran in a crisp uniform approached, nervous but determined. "Sir, my parents fought at the siege of Orion Gate. They said you were the best pilot they ever saw. It's an honor to meet you." Marcus offered his hand, the old ghosts fading into pride. Thank you. They were braver than I ever was. What brings you to Unity? The young man smiled. Hope, I guess. I want to see what peace looks like. Marcus nodded, watching the future unfold in front of him. Children of both worlds learning to live side by side, enemies becoming neighbors, strangers becoming family. The evening waned, but the warmth in the hall lingered. Lyra rejoined Marcus, her presence quiet but radiant. She leaned against him, her hand seeking his. Are you happy? She asked, voice soft beneath the music. He looked at her, the city spread out beyond the balcony, and the child growing between them. For the first time, the ache of exile was gone, replaced by belonging. I am, he answered, and knew it was true. The last shuttles departed, their engines casting rippling trails of light across the dusk as they slipped out of Unity's atmosphere. The city below gradually quieted, the day's celebrations fading to a gentle hum. Marcus and Lyra stood together on their balcony, the night air crisp against their skin, the distant glow of city towers reflecting in the glass curves of the buildings. The world they had built, against every odd, every threat, now lay peaceful beneath the alien stars. Lyra leaned into Marcus, her hands resting protectively on her belly. He draped his arm around her shoulders, drawing her close as they watched the night deepen, constellations unfamiliar and beautiful stretching overhead. Kale has developed a sense of humor, Marcus mused, recalling the old instructor's dry remark about the questionable Terran music and the new curriculum he had never imagined would be named after a human. Lyra's lips curved into a fond smile. He's learned to respect the unpredictable. You gave them a new perspective. Marcus grinned, feeling the old camaraderie. I just forced them to look at the world sideways. She nudged him gently, her eyes warm. It was needed. They thought strength meant never yielding. You taught them that mercy is strength too. They stood in silence, listening to the distant city, occasional laughter, a faint melody, the hum of transport lines. Above, stars blinked, silent witnesses to all they had endured. Marcus's thoughts drifted. Do you ever wonder about Drax? He asked quietly, his tone neither cruel nor curious, just searching for closure. Lyra shook her head, the motion small but decisive. He's irrelevant now. A relic of a past age, his name is only spoken as a warning. She hesitated, her gaze rising to the stars. Sometimes, though, I worry. About our child. They'll be the first. A bridge between two worlds. It's a heavy legacy to carry. He turned her gently to face him, cradling her face in his hands. The years of battle and loss had left their mark on them both. But her eyes, those luminous, shifting blue-gold eyes, still held the hope and strength that had drawn him through every trial. They'll be Zalari, Marcus said, his voice steady. A promise. They'll have your wit, your fire. They'll have my stubbornness and my knack for fixing things that shouldn't work. And unfortunately, my taste in strong-willed leaders. Lyra laughed, the sound clear and bright, echoing over the balcony. You're impossible. He grinned, loving the way she looked in that moment. Content, fierce, vulnerable. An impossible man for an impossible journey. She softened, reaching for him, her hands covering his. Do you think they'll be ready? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. He brushed his thumb along her cheek. They won't have to be ready alone. We'll be here. This city. These people. They're different now. You changed them, Lyra. You gave them something to believe in. Her eyes filled with unshed tears. We did that. Together. He leaned in and kissed her, slow and sure beneath the unfamiliar stars. It was not the frantic union of survivors, but the deep, certain connection of builders. of two who had chosen one another every day, through storms and silence. He let the moment linger, his forehead resting against hers. He slid his hand to her belly, feeling the steady beat of new life beneath his palm. They won't just be a bridge, Lyra. They'll be the future we built. They'll belong to both worlds, and to themselves. Lyra closed her eyes, breathing in the certainty of his words. She leaned into his touch, trust complete, letting herself rest in the warmth of their love and the promise of their child. You always make it sound so simple. Maybe it is, Marcus said. Maybe the future is just the sum of all the small choices we make. Like this one, standing here with you, choosing hope over fear. The city faded further into silence. The garden below rustled with the sound of night birds, the faint scent of flowering vines drifting up to their balcony. Lyra tucked herself against Marcus's chest, the curve of her stomach pressed to his side, her fingers laced with his. "Do you remember the storm?" she asked softly, her voice full of memory. He smiled, tracing her hair with gentle fingers. Every detail, the lightning, the cold, the way you looked at me when you woke. I thought I was saving you. Turns out you saved me. She laughed, tears in her voice. We saved each other, Marcus, again and again. They stood together in the hush, letting the world turn beneath their feet. The stars above, so distant and strange, seemed a little closer now. No longer a threat, but a promise. The storm had passed. The fight was over. But this was not an ending. It was the beginning of everything. He pressed another kiss to her brow, his hand never leaving the small, certain swell of her belly. Whatever comes, we'll face it. Together. Lyra closed her eyes, surrendering to the quiet. For the first time, her fears stilled. She belonged. To him. To this place. To the family they were about to become. And here, beneath the strange sky of a world they'd made together, Marcus was finally, truly, and forever, home. Our story ends here. Make sure you subscribe, press the like button, and tell us in the comments what stood out to you the most in this video. Your feedback means a lot to our team. You'll discover many more captivating stories on our channel. See you in the next one.